Young billionaire panics without a translator in a crucial meeting until the cleaning lady's daughter appears. I can help. I speak 5 languages. What she does next is unbelievable. Lucas Turner rubbed his tired eyes. The clock in the corner of his screen read 3:17 a.m., but he wasn't even thinking about sleep. Papers were scattered across the glass desk in his penthouse office, each one a piece of the puzzle that could save his company. Just one more paragraph, he murmured to himself, taking another sip of cold coffee. Turner Investments was on the brink of collapse. After 2 years of poor decisions and an unpredictable market, the company his father had built with so much effort could vanish in a matter of weeks. Unless the next morning's meeting went well, Lucas reviewed the contract for the 10th time. The Japanese investors were his last hope. If he could impress them in this meeting, the company would have a chance. If he failed, well, he preferred not to think about that. His cell phone rang. It was Michelle, his assistant. "Still awake, boss?" "How did you guess?" Lucas replied, forcing a light tone he didn't feel. "Because I know you. Everything is set for tomorrow. Get some rest." Lucas gave a humorless smile. "Sleep is for the weak. Or for those who don't have a company to save." "Lucas," Michelle's voice turned serious, "you need to be rested tomorrow. This meeting is too important for you to show up with 3-day-old dark circles under your eyes." He knew she was right. "I'll try. See you tomorrow." Lucas hung up and looked out the window. The city sparkled below, indifferent to his problems. So many lights on at this hour. How many people were like him, fighting to save something important? He put the documents in his briefcase and finally threw himself into bed, knowing sleep wouldn't come easily. The day dawned grey and cold. Lucas was already at the office by 7 a.m., reviewing every detail of the presentation. "Tea, coffee?" Michelle appeared at the door, impeccable as always, holding 2 cups. "You're an angel." Lucas took the cup and drank a long sip. "Any word from Mr. Tanaka?" "They've confirmed they'll arrive at 9 a.m. The conference room is ready. Catering is organized. Materials are printed. All that's left is for you to take a deep breath." Lucas nodded, grateful for her efficiency. "And Richard? Has our translator arrived?" "He should be on his way." Michelle checked her watch. "He's never late." The next few hours passed in a blur of final preparations. Lucas adjusted data in the presentation, double-checked numbers, and mentally rehearsed his speech in English. The Japanese part would be handled by the translator, as his knowledge of the language was limited to basic greetings. At 8:55, the reception phone rang. Michelle answered, her face growing tense as she listened. "The investors have arrived," she informed him, covering the phone. "They're coming up." Lucas took a deep breath, adjusted his tie, and walked toward the elevator. He had rehearsed this moment for weeks. He was ready. The group of 5 Japanese executives, led by Mr. Tanaka, stepped out of the elevator with characteristic punctuality. All were in impeccable dark suits, with serious expressions and measured steps. "Mr. Tanaka, welcome to Turner Investments." Lucas extended his hand, smiling. "It's an honor to have you." The older man gave a slight nod and shook his hand. "Mr. Turner, we are looking forward to this meeting." Michelle guided everyone to the conference room, where coffee and water were already served. Lucas noticed she seemed tense, frequently glancing at her watch. As everyone settled in, Lucas prepared to begin. It was then that Michelle approached him, whispering in his ear, "We have a problem. Richard just called. He was in a car accident on his way here. He's okay, but he won't make it." Lucas felt as if the floor had disappeared from under his feet. No translator, the entire presentation, all the technical details. How would he explain it all in rudimentary Japanese? "Don't we have another translator available?" Michelle shook her head. "Not on such short notice." "I'm trying, but..." Lucas looked at the executives. They were waiting, their expressions neutral, some subtly checking their watches. The silence grew, becoming heavy. Every second felt like an eternity. "Gentlemen," Lucas began in English, struggling to keep his voice steady. "I apologize, but we are facing a small setback with our translator." Mr. Tanaka frowned. 2 of the executives exchanged glances. Lucas felt beads of cold sweat trickle down his back. Was this how it all ended? Because of a translator? I can help. I speak 5 languages. The childish voice, clear and enthusiastic, made everyone turn toward the door. A little girl stood there, her dark hair in a simple braid, wearing a blue dress that was a little too big for her. She was clutching an old notebook to her chest and looking directly at Lucas with eyes shining with confidence. The silence that followed was absolute. Lucas blinked, certain he had misheard. Then, to everyone's astonishment, the girl turned to Mr. Tanaka and said something in perfect Japanese. Not just a few words, but complete sentences, with impeccable pronunciation. The older executive's eyes widened for a moment. Then he smiled, the first genuine smile Lucas had seen on his face, and replied in his native language, "Sophie." A woman appeared at the door, visibly embarrassed. It was Marisol Rivera, part of the cleaning crew. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Turner. She was supposed to be in the break room doing her homework while I finished my shift." "Are you this young lady's mother?" Mr. Tanaka asked in English. Marisol nodded nervously. "Yes, sir." "I apologize for the interruption. Your daughter just offered to be our translator," Lucas explained, still stunned by the situation. "What? But she's only 7 years old," Marisol protested weakly. "Mom, I can help," Sophie insisted. "It's just translating what they say like we do with the books at home." Lucas was torn between desperation and disbelief. Entrusting the future of his company to a 7-year-old seemed insane, but what choice did he have? "Mrs. Rivera," Mr. Tanaka interjected, "if you'll allow me, I would like your daughter to stay. We spoke briefly, and her Japanese is impressive." Lucas and Marisol exchanged glances. The mother seemed as surprised as he was. "If Mr. Turner agrees..." Marisol hesitated. All eyes turned to Lucas. He looked at the little girl, who held his gaze with a confidence surprising for someone so young. "All right," he finally decided. "Sophie, can you help us today?" Her smile lit up the room. "Yes, sir." Michelle quickly brought a taller chair, where Sophie sat next to Lucas. The girl opened her old notebook, filled with notes in different languages, and prepared herself with the seriousness of a professional. "Shall we begin, gentlemen?" Lucas asked, trying to regain his composure. And so, the most important meeting of Lucas Turner's life began, with a 7-year-old translator by his side. What happened in the next 2 hours was simply unbelievable. Sophie didn't just translate, she shone. With a fluency that left everyone bewildered, the 7-year-old girl navigated between English and Japanese as if she had been born doing it. Even more surprising, she had mastered complex financial vocabulary. "The third-quarter cash flow projections," Lucas would say, and Sophie would translate without hesitation. "Comparative risk analysis," one of the executives would point out in Japanese, and she would convert it to English with precision. In a particularly tense moment, when one of the more skeptical executives questioned the projected profit margins, Sophie not only translated the question, she captured the tone of distrust and conveyed it perfectly, allowing Lucas to respond not just to the words, but to the underlying concern. The Japanese executives' expressions gradually changed. What had begun as looks of disbelief at seeing a child in the room turned into genuine admiration. During a particularly technical explanation about asset allocation, Sophie paused briefly. "This word," she asked Lucas, pointing to a term on the slide, "is it accelerated depreciation?" Lucas nodded, amazed. Sophie smiled and continued the translation without missing a beat, explaining the complex concept in fluent Japanese. Michelle, standing in the corner of the room, watched the scene, dumbfounded. She occasionally exchanged incredulous looks with Lucas, who could only respond with a slight shrug. He was just as perplexed as she was. At another remarkable moment, as Lucas explained his strategy for the Asian market, Sophie not only translated his words, but added small Japanese cultural nuances and gestures he would have never known. She adjusted her tone, formality, and even her posture as she spoke. How does she know that? Lucas thought, watching her take a small, respectful pause after mentioning the expansion to Kyoto, a cultural detail he was completely unaware of. Mr. Tanaka noticed and nodded in approval. As the meeting progressed, something extraordinary happened. Sophie's presence was actually improving the negotiation. The Japanese executives, initially stiff and formal, visibly relaxed. Even occasional smiles appeared. "Ask Mr. Turner about his long-term vision," Mr. Tanaka requested in Japanese. Sophie translated, and Lucas responded, watching how she maintained perfect eye contact, absorbing every word before conveying it with accuracy and appropriate emotion. At one point, one of the younger executives made a joke in Japanese. Sophie translated it perfectly, capturing not just the words but the comedic timing. The whole room laughed, including Lucas, a moment of human connection that transcended languages and ages. During a brief coffee break, Lucas approached Marisol, who was waiting nervously in the hallway. "Your daughter is—" "I have no words," he said quietly. "I've never seen anything like it," Marisol smiled shyly. Sophie has always had a knack for languages. She reads a lot and learns quickly. There was something more there, Lucas sensed, something Marisol wasn't saying. But before he could ask more, Michelle called him back into the room. In the final moments of the meeting, as Lucas presented his final proposal, Sophie remained flawless, even after 2 hours of intense concentration. Not a single mistake, not a moment of hesitation. "Mr. Turner," Mr. Tanaka said at the end, as everyone stood up. "This has been one of the most productive and enlightening meetings I have ever had in the United States." Lucas smiled, gently placing a hand on Sophie's shoulder. "We had some special help today." "Indeed," Tanaka agreed, bowing slightly to the little girl. "Young Sophie, your talent is extraordinary. You have a bright future." Sophie gave a small, perfectly executed bow. "Arigatou gozaimasu, Tanaka-san," she replied in Japanese. The executives said their goodbyes, each one making a point to personally thank Sophie, who responded with perfect politeness, switching between English and Japanese as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I will send my comments later this week," Mr. Tanaka said as he entered the elevator. "It was a pleasure, Mr. Turner." When the doors closed, Lucas finally allowed himself to relax. He leaned against the wall and took a deep breath. "That was surreal," he murmured. Michelle approached, grinning from ear to ear. "Lucas, they loved it. Mr. Tanaka's assistant told me they are inclined to move forward." Seriously. Lucas could hardly believe it. After months of uncertainty, the meeting had been a success. "Yes," he said, he's never seen Mr. Tanaka so impressed. Lucas turned to thank Sophie, but the girl was already at the end of the room with her mother, putting her notebook in her backpack. "Sophie," he called, walking over, "I don't know how to thank you for what you did today." The girl smiled shyly. "It was fun. I like translating." "You saved the meeting," Lucas said, crouching down to her level. "It was unbelievable." "We have to go," Marisol intervened gently. "Sophie has school this afternoon." Lucas nodded, standing up. Of course, but please, I need to repay you somehow. Perhaps we can talk later." Marisol hesitated, then gave a brief nod. "We'll be here tomorrow. It's my regular shift." "Great," Lucas smiled. "Until tomorrow, then." As the two left, Lucas stood there watching them. The question wouldn't leave his mind. How did a 7-year-old girl, the daughter of a cleaning lady, acquire such a command of languages and vocabulary? Where did that confidence, that maturity, come from? "Lucas," Michelle called, "the team is waiting in your office. Everyone wants to know how it went." He nodded, turning to follow his assistant. The meeting had been a success, thanks to an intervention no one could have predicted. But as he walked down the hallways, Lucas knew that something fundamental had changed that morning. And it wasn't just the potential salvation of his company. It was as if a door had opened to a world he had never noticed before, a world where small miracles happened in unexpected places, a world where a 7-year-old child could do what adult specialists couldn't. In the office, everyone greeted him with applause and smiles. The celebration began immediately, with champagne being opened and congratulations exchanged. Lucas participated mechanically, smiling and thanking everyone, but his mind was elsewhere. On a little girl with an old notebook and eyes that seemed to know far more than they should. The meeting had been a success. The first step was taken, but the question remained, More important than anything else, how did this girl learn so much? And why did that question seem so important now? The email arrived at 9:47 a.m. Lucas was on his third cup of coffee, reviewing documents, when the notification popped up on his screen. Sender, Tanaka Investments Ltd. His finger hesitated over the mouse. This was the moment that would define everything. He took a deep breath and clicked. "Dear Mr. Turner," the formal message began. "Following our productive meeting and subsequent analysis, we are pleased to confirm our decision to proceed with the investment as discussed." Lucas read the paragraph 3 times to be sure. There was no doubt. The deal was sealed. The Japanese had accepted the terms. Turner Investments was saved. He leaned back in his chair, a wave of relief washing over his body. After months of uncertainty, sleepless nights, and the constant threat of bankruptcy, he could finally breathe. The office door opened and Michelle walked in, holding her tablet. "Lucas, we need to review the agenda for—" She stopped, noticing his expression. "What is it?" He turned the monitor so she could see the email. "They accepted." Michelle's eyes widened. She quickly read the message and let out a shout of joy that was probably heard throughout the entire floor. "We did it!" She came over for a quick, professional hug. "I'll let the team know. This calls for a celebration." In the following minutes, the office was transformed. The news spread like wildfire, and soon colleagues were appearing at his door with smiles, handshakes, and pats on the back. Someone found champagne in the conference room closet. Disposable cups were distributed. "A toast to Lucas," proposed Jeff from the finance department, "the man who saved the company." Everyone raised their cups, smiling at him. Lucas returned the smile, but something didn't feel right. Jeff's words echoed in his mind. The man who saved the company. But it wasn't him, not really. It was a 7-year-old girl who had appeared out of nowhere with an old notebook. One moment, Lucas raised his hand as the buzz began to grow. "Right before the celebration really gets started, I want to say something." The room fell silent. "We all know this deal was pretty much our last chance. And yes, I'm very happy it worked out." He paused. "But the real credit isn't mine. If it weren't for Sophie Rivera, the daughter of Marisol from the cleaning crew, we'd all be updating our resumes today." A few nervous laughs went through the room. Many nodded, remembering the surprising story that had already spread throughout the company. "So," Lucas continued, "while we celebrate, let's not forget who really saved the day. And speaking of which," he turned to Michelle, "is Marisol working today?" Michelle consulted her tablet. "Yes, the afternoon shift. She should be arriving now." "Great." Lucas placed his untouched cup on the table. "I'm going to find her. Continue the celebration without me. I'll be back later." Ignoring the confused looks, Lucas left his office. As he passed by the front desk, he picked up an envelope from his assistant's table. He had prepared it the night before, a generous check, thinking it would be a fitting way to say thank you. Now, with the deal actually closed, the amount seemed even more justified. He found Marisol on the second floor, pushing her cleaning cart down the hallway. "Mrs. Rivera," he called out. She turned, surprised. "Mr. Turner, is something wrong?" "Yes, something is," he smiled. "The deal with the Japanese investors was signed, and it's all thanks to Sophie." Marisol gave a shy smile. "I'm glad. Sophie will be happy to hear that." Lucas held out the envelope. "I wanted to give you this personally. Her small thank you for what your daughter did." Marisol looked at the envelope, hesitant. "Please," Lucas insisted. "It's the least I can do." Reluctantly, she accepted it. "Thank you, Mr. Turner. Actually," he continued, "I'd like to thank Sophie in person. Would you mind if I stopped by your house after work?" Marisol's expression subtly changed. A mix of surprise and discomfort crossed her face. "Our home is very simple, sir. Please," Lucas insisted gently, "it would be important to me." After a moment of hesitation, Marisol nodded. "We finish at 5. If you want to come by after 6... "Perfect," Lucas smiled. "Charles, could you give me the address?" Lucas checked the address on his car's GPS for the 3rd time. He was in the right place, but it was still hard to believe. The neighborhood was completely different from the financial district where he worked or the luxury residential area where he lived. Old buildings were squeezed together on narrow streets. Kids were playing ball in the middle of the road, only moving aside when cars passed. He parked in front of the building Marisol had indicated. It was a 5-story building, its paint faded and cracked in several places. A group of teenagers sitting on the front steps watched him with curiosity as he passed. The elevator had an out-of-order sign, so Lucas climbed the 4 flights of stairs. The hallway was dark, lit only by a dim bulb in the ceiling. The walls showed signs of dampness and peeling paint. He stopped in front of apartment 402 and hesitated before knocking. The contrast between this place and his usual world was shocking. How could the same city contain such distant realities? Finally, he knocked on the door. A few seconds later, Marisol answered. She looked different without her work uniform. Younger, perhaps, in simple jeans and a white blouse. "Mr. Turner," she said, visibly uncomfortable. "Please, come in." Lucas stepped into a small but impeccably clean and organized apartment. The living room and kitchen formed a single space, separated only by a counter. The furniture was simple and used, but well cared for. On the walls, a few framed photos of Sophie at different ages, and there she was, sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by books. When she saw him, Sophie smiled. "Mr. Turner, you came to visit us." "Hello, Sophie." Lucas returned the smile. "I came to thank you in person for your help yesterday." "Please, have a seat." Marisol gestured to one of the kitchen chairs. "Can I offer you some coffee?" "That would be great, thank you." Lucas sat down, taking in the surroundings. He noticed something surprising. Makeshift shelves on the walls, loaded with books, used books, many with worn covers, but an impressive quantity for such a small apartment. Sophie followed his gaze. "Do you like to read too?" "Yes," Lucas replied. "You have quite a collection here." "Mom and I love books," Sophie said proudly. "It's how we visit all the garage sales and libraries in the neighborhood." Marisol placed a cup of coffee in front of Lucas. "I'm sorry if it's not as good as the one in your office." "I'm sure it's better," Lucas smiled. "In the office, no one has time to make coffee properly." An awkward silence hung between them for a moment. Lucas noticed Sophie was doing homework, math from what he could see, problems that seemed far too advanced for a 7-year-old. "How was school today?" he asked. Sophie shrugged. "Normal. I finished the exercises before the others, so the teacher gave me these extra ones." Lucas nodded, impressed. He looked around again, absorbing the details. An old refrigerator that made a faint humming sound, simple curtains on the window overlooking the busy street, a single photograph in a plastic frame, a younger Marisol with baby Sophie in her arms. The contrast with his own penthouse apartment was stark. There, everything was spacious, new, expensive. Here, every object seemed to have a story, a specific purpose, a need to last as long as possible. "Mr. Turner." Marisol sat down at the table. "Thank you for the check. It's very generous. Please, call me Lucas." He took a sip of the coffee, which was in fact delicious. "And it's not generosity. It's only fair." Sophie watched the two of them with curiosity. Her pencil paused over her notebook. "Sophie," Lucas turned to her, "you saved my company yesterday. You know that, don't you?" The girl smiled shyly. "I just helped translate." "It wasn't just translating, it was extraordinary." Lucas leaned forward. "Because of you, I achieved something very important I want to give back." Marisol visibly tensed. "The check is more than enough, sir." "I'm not talking about money," Lucas continued, looking at Sophie. "I'm talking about her future." The silence that followed was heavy. Marisol looked down at her hands, as if fearing what would come next. "You have an incredible talent, Sophie," Lucas said gently. "A gift that shouldn't be wasted. I would like to help with your education, school, college, whatever is necessary." Marisol looked up, a mix of emotions on her face. Hope, distrust, fear. "Why?" she asked simply. The question caught Lucas off guard. Why, indeed? He wasn't sure of the complete answer himself. "Because," he began, searching for the right words, Because talents like hers are rare, because she helped me when I needed it most, and because... He looked around the small apartment, at the used books, at the quiet determination that emanated from the place. Because I think I've never truly seen the people who support careers like mine. Sophie looked at him with wide, attentive eyes, absorbing every word. The business world teaches us to look up, Lucas continued, to the next steps on the ladder, to the people who can take us higher. We rarely look around at who really keeps everything running. At people like you. Marisol looked down again. Her hands nervously clutched the dish towel in her lap. Mr. Turner, Lucas, she said quietly, your offer is very generous, but we are proud of our independence. And offers like these, they sometimes disappear when the initial gratitude wears off. Her frankness surprised him. And it also shamed him, because he knew there was truth in her words. How many promises made in moments of euphoria dissolved when life moved on? I understand your concern, he replied sincerely, and I respect your pride. But I'm not offering charity, I'm offering an opportunity, an open door that Sophie can choose to walk through or not. Sophie, who had been listening in silence, finally spoke. What kind of school would it be? Lucas smiled at her. A school where you can develop your full potential, where there are other students as brilliant as you, and teachers who can truly challenge you. The girl's eyes sparkled for a moment, before she looked at her mother with a questioning expression. Marisol sighed deeply. Sophie has always been different. She learns everything so quickly. At her current school she gets bored, but better schools cost money we don't have. Now you do, Lucas stated gently. If you accept. Sophie looked at her mother, then at Lucas, and then smiled. A calm and surprisingly mature smile for someone so young. I would like to go to a new school, she said simply. Marisol's face was a battle of emotions, hope fighting against fear, the desire to give her daughter the best confronting pride and distrust. Finally, she nodded slowly. If this is what Sophie wants... Lucas felt an unexpected relief. He hadn't realized how much he wanted them to accept until that moment. I will make all the necessary arrangements, he promised, and it won't just be the school. I want to support her in everything she needs to develop her talent, books, extra classes, whatever it takes. Marisol looked him in the eyes. And if one day you change your mind? If it's just a passing whim? It was a fair question, Lucas reflected before answering. We can formalize everything, he suggested. A legal contract, an educational trust fund, something that doesn't depend on my mood of the day or future circumstances. That seemed to reassure her a little. Marisol nodded slowly. I accept your help, Mr. Turner. For Sophie. Lucas extended his hand. It's a deal then. Marisol shook his hand firmly, her eyes conveying a clear message. She would allow this opportunity for her daughter, but she would be watchful. Sophie watched the scene with a small smile, as if she understood more than she let on. Sash, can I still keep my old books too? She asked. Lucas laughed. Of course you can. In fact, I think we're going to need more bookshelves here. A moment of lightness filled the room. Marisol offered more coffee, which Lucas accepted. The conversation flowed to lighter topics, Sophie's favorite books, the subjects she liked most in school. When he finally prepared to leave, it was already past 8 o'clock. The time had flown by in a way Lucas hadn't expected. At the door, he crouched down to be at Sophie's level. Thank you again for yesterday, he said sincerely. You didn't just save my company. I think you reminded me of something important that I had forgotten. What? Asked Sophie, curious. Lucas smiled. That the most surprising things can come from the most unexpected places, and that maybe I need to pay more attention. Sophie nodded, as if that made perfect sense. Mom always says we should keep our eyes and our hearts open. Your mother is very wise, Lucas replied, looking at Marisol with new respect. As he left the building and returned to his car, Lucas felt something strange, as if he had left a part of himself in that small apartment and brought something new with him in its place. The contrast between the two worlds was so great, it almost hurt. In the living room of his spacious and impersonal penthouse, hours later, he found himself thinking about that shelf of used books, about Sophie studying intently, surrounded by knowledge patiently gathered over the years, about Marisol, with her pride and quiet determination, raising an extraordinary daughter in circumstances many would consider impossible. And for the first time in a long time, Lucas questioned not just what he had achieved, but on what foundations his achievements were built. Something had changed. A door had opened, and he knew with a strange certainty that he wouldn't be able to close it again. The Westfield Academy building stood imposing against the blue autumn sky. 3 floors of red brick, large windows, and a main entrance with white columns. Luxury cars pulled up to the circular driveway, dropping off children with expensive brand-name backpacks and impeccable uniforms. Sophie Rivera squeezed her mother's hand tighter. "It's so big," she whispered. Marisol adjusted the navy blue tie of her daughter's new uniform. "You'll get used to it, mi vida." But her voice betrayed her own insecurity. This world did not belong to them. It never had. Lucas Turner parked his car and walked over to where they were waiting. For the past 2 weeks, he had taken care of everything: enrollment, uniform, school supplies, interviews with the headmistress. Westfield Academy was one of the most prestigious schools in the city, known for its gifted education program. "Good morning," Lucas smiled, trying to hide his own anxiety. "Ready for the big day?" Sophie nodded silently, her eyes scanning the courtyard where children chatted in small groups, casting curious glances at the newcomer. "Let's go," Lucas said gently. "I'll introduce you to Mrs. Bennett, your teacher." The 3 of them walked together to the entrance. Marisol seemed even more out of place than Sophie, in her simple dress bought especially for the occasion. Elegant mothers chatted in small circles, briefly interrupting their conversations to observe the newcomers. Mr. Turner, a middle-aged woman, approached, smiling professionally. "Good to see you again. Mrs. Winters." Lucas shook the headmistress's hand. "Sure, this is Sophie Rivera, our new student, and her mother, Marisol." The woman leaned down slightly. "Sophie, we are so happy to have you with us. Mr. Turner has told us about your impressive talents." Sophie smiled shyly. "Thank you, Mum. Mrs. Bennett is waiting in her classroom," the headmistress continued. "Why don't I take you there? Parents usually say their goodbyes here in the courtyard." Marisol knelt in front of her daughter, adjusting the uniform tie one last time. "Everything will be fine, sweetheart. I'll be here at pickup at 3 o'clock sharp." Sophie nodded, hugging her mother briefly. Then, with a courage that surprised everyone, she followed Mrs. Winters into the building, her small figure soon disappearing among the other students. Marisol remained motionless, watching the empty space where her daughter had stood seconds before. "She'll be fine," Lucas said, trying to sound confident. "I hope so," Marisol replied, her voice almost a whisper. "Why, this place isn't for people like us." Her frankness caught him off guard. "Marisol, no, please," she interrupted gently. "I know your intentions are good, but look around, Mr. Turner. These people, their lives, it's a different world." Lucas looked at the courtyard, suddenly seeing it through her eyes. The luxury cars, the designer clothes, the conversations about summer homes and riding lessons. "Sophie belongs anywhere her mind can grow," he finally answered, "and I'll do my best to make sure she feels at home here." Marisol looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and skepticism. Oh, some barriers can't be broken down with just money or good intentions. Before Lucas could respond, his phone rang. It was Michelle, reminding him of the meeting with the Japanese investors in 30 minutes. "I have to go," he said reluctantly, "but I'll be available if you need anything at all." Marisol nodded. "Thank you. I'll be fine. I have to get to work anyway." As he walked back to his car, Lucas glanced one last time at the imposing school building. For the first time, he felt a pang of doubt. Was this really the best place for Sophie? Mrs. Bennett's classroom was spacious and well lit, with desks arranged in small groups. 24 children, all Sophie's age, but clearly from a completely different world than hers. "Class, this is Sophie Rivera, our new student," the teacher announced. "Please make her feel welcome." "Hello, Sophie," they replied in unison, their voices polite but distant. "Sophie, why don't you sit with Emily, Blake, and Madison?" Mrs. Bennett indicated a table where 3 children were watching her with poorly concealed curiosity. Sophie walked slowly to the designated spot, aware of the eyes following her. Her uniform was identical to the others, but somehow she felt that everyone could see right through it, see that she didn't belong here. "Hi," said the girl who must have been Emily. "What school did you come from?" "Lincoln Public School," Sophie answered quietly. The three exchanged glances that Sophie couldn't interpret. "My dad said, 'You speak 5 languages,'" commented Blake, a blonde boy with expensive framed glasses. "Is that true?" Sophie nodded. "English, Spanish, Japanese, French, and I'm learning Mandarin." "Wow," Madison's eyes widened. "How did you learn all that?" Before Sophie could answer, Mrs. Bennet called the class's attention to the start of the math lesson. While the teacher explained problems Sophie had known how to solve for at least a year, she observed her new classmates, trying to understand the unspoken rules of this new world. During recess, Sophie sat alone on a bench in the courtyard, watching the others form their natural groups. No one was deliberately rude, but no one made a real effort to include her either. It was as if she were a curious object that everyone wanted to see from a distance, but no one knew quite how to approach. "Where do you live?" Madison asked during lunch, when Sophie was finally invited to sit with a few girls. "In the Parkside neighborhood," Sophie replied. "Parkside?" Another girl frowned. "My driver never goes through there. Dad says it's dangerous." Sophie felt her face burn. "It's not dangerous, it's just different." "And your mum?" Madison continued. "What does she do?" Sophie hesitated. "She cleans offices." An awkward silence followed. The girls exchanged glances, and Sophie wished she could disappear right then. "My mom's a surgeon," one of them offered, breaking the silence. "She operates on brains and stuff." The conversation quickly shifted to the parents, impressive jobs, international trips, and plans for the next school break. Sophie ate in silence, feeling smaller and more invisible with each passing moment. The afternoon classes weren't any better. During science class, when the teacher asked about lunar cycles, Sophie answered correctly and with details that weren't even in the book. This earned her even stranger looks. "Know-it-all," she heard someone whisper as she returned to her seat. At the end of the day, when the bell rang announcing the end of classes, Sophie was the first to pack her things. She walked quickly out to the courtyard, anxiously searching for her mother among the crowd of drivers and nannies waiting. Marisol was there, looking small and out of place among the well-dressed adults. When she saw her daughter, her face lit up. "Mi vida, how was your first day?" Sophie forced a smile. "It was good." "The teachers are nice." Marisol studied her daughter's face, seeing beyond the words. "Let's go home. I made your favorite dish for dinner." On the bus ride back, Sophie was silent, looking out the window. Marisol respected her space, but her heart ached. She knew that look. It was the same one she saw in the mirror during her first days in this country, when everything seemed too big and too strange. Lucas arrived at the Riverus apartment at 7 in the evening, carrying a bag full of books. He had stopped at the bookstore after work, choosing titles he thought Sophie would like. "How was the first day?" he asked as soon as Marisol opened the door. Her look said it all. "Difficult." Sophie was sitting at the kitchen table, doing her homework with an almost forced concentration. She looked up when Lucas entered and smiled, a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I brought you some books," he said, placing the bag on the table. "I thought we could pick some out together." Sophie's face genuinely lit up for the first time that day. "Thank you." While Sophie explored her new treasures, Lucas and Marisol talked quietly by the window. "She didn't fit in well," Marisol sighed. "She won't admit it, but I can see it." Lucas nodded, feeling a pang of guilt. "These things take time." "It's only the first day. The other children, they come from families like yours, not like ours," Marisol continued. "I don't know if Sophie will ever feel like she truly belongs in that world." Lucas watched the girl, who was now flipping through a book on astronomy with bright eyes. Maybe the problem isn't Sophie adapting to that world, but that world learning to value someone like Sophie. Marisol looked at him with curiosity. "What do you mean?" "I've been thinking a lot since I met you two," Lucas explained, "about privilege, opportunities, about who has access to what and why. Maybe it's time for those kids to learn that intelligence and talent have nothing to do with zip codes or bank accounts. A small smile appeared on Marisol's face. That's a beautiful idea, but the world rarely works that way. Then let's try to change it, at least for Sophie. Lucas approached the table. What if we help with homework? Then we can review a little Japanese for tomorrow's class. For the next hour, the three of them worked on the school exercises together. Lucas quickly realized that Sophie was far beyond her class level, which probably contributed to her discomfort at school. We need to talk to Mrs. Bennett, he commented as Sophie solved advanced math problems with ease. You should be in an even more accelerated program. When they finished their studies, Marisol served hot chocolate for everyone. Sophie, more relaxed now, began to share small details of her day, the impressive science labs, the huge library, the piano in the music room. Would you like to learn piano? Lucas asked. Sophie's eyes lit up. Can I? Of course, he smiled. I'll check if the school offers private lessons. Later, when Sophie went to brush her teeth before bed, Lucas and Marisol were alone again in the kitchen. How did you do it? He asked suddenly. Do what? Raise such an extraordinary daughter, in circumstances that aren't the easiest. Marisol was silent for a moment, looking at the cup in her hands. Love, mostly, attention, and books, lots of books. There must be more to it than that, Lucas insisted gently. Sophie isn't just smart. She has a maturity, an understanding of the world that 7-year-olds simply don't have. An enigmatic smile crossed Marisol's face. Maybe one day I'll tell you the whole story. Lucas wanted to ask more, but something in her tone stopped him. There were secrets there, stories he wasn't yet ready to hear. I'll help her adjust at school, he promised, changing the subject. I'll talk to the teachers, to the headmistress if necessary. We'll make sure she feels like she belongs there. It's not just the school, Marisol said quietly. It's everything. This new world you've opened up for her. It has doors that close on people like us all the time. Lucas felt the weight of her words. Then I'll make sure those doors stay open. For both of you. Sophie returned to the room already in her pajamas. Are you leaving now? She asked Lucas. Yes, it's getting late, but I'll be back tomorrow to hear about your second day, okay? Sophie's face lit up. Can I take the astronomy book to show at school? Of course, Lucas smiled. It's yours now. At the door, Sophie surprised him with a quick hug. Thank you for the books. Something warmed Lucas's chest, a strange and new feeling. You're welcome, Sophie. Driving back home, Lucas reflected on the day. Helping Sophie wouldn't be as simple as he had imagined. It wasn't enough to pay expensive tuition or buy books. It was about building bridges between worlds that rarely met. And maybe, he thought, it wasn't just Sophie who needed help fitting into a new world. Maybe he himself was just beginning to see a world that had always existed around him, but that he had never really noticed. A world where girls like Sophie, with extraordinary talents, grew up in small apartments, with mothers who worked day and night to keep shelves full of used books. A world that, somehow, was now his too. Winter gave way to spring, and spring to summer. Almost 5 months had passed since Sophie's first day at Westfield Academy. In the teacher's lounge, Lucas waited patiently, looking at the framed photographs of previous classes on the walls. It had become a monthly routine, these meetings with Sophie's teachers to track her progress. The door opened, and Mrs. Bennett walked in, followed by Mr. Lawson, the science teacher, and Mrs. Garcia, who taught music. Mr. Turner, Mrs. Bennett smiled, extending her hand. Thank you for coming again. It's always a pleasure, Lucas replied. How is Sophie doing? The 3 teachers exchanged glances before Mrs. Bennett spoke. Extraordinarily well, to be honest. Lucas smiled, feeling a wave of pride that surprised him with its intensity. At first, we were worried about her adjustment, the teacher continued. Sophie was so quiet, so reserved. But now, she has blossomed, completed Mr. Lawson, adjusting his glasses. Last week, during our science fair, her project on mathematical patterns in nature impressed even the middle school teachers. She managed to explain the Fibonacci sequence to 5-year-olds using sunflowers and seashells. It was remarkable, And in music class, added Mrs. Garcia enthusiastically. Sophie has progressed more in a few months than many students do in years. She has an absolutely perfect ear. Lucas listened, feeling a mixture of joy and curiosity. The same question persisted. Where did it all come from? Academically, she is at least 2 years ahead of her peers, Mrs. Bennet continued. We are adapting the curriculum to keep her challenged, but what has been most impressive is her social evolution. How so? Lucas asked, remembering the initial difficulties. In the beginning, the other children saw Sophie as a curiosity, the teacher explained. Now, they seek her out, for group projects, for help with difficult assignments, and Sophie has learned to share her knowledge without making others feel diminished. That's a rare talent, even among adults, observed Mr. Lawson. And her classmates. Lucas wanted to know. Has she made friends? A few, replied Mrs. Bennet. Emily Taylor and Sophie have become particularly close, and there's a small group that has lunch together daily. She's not the most popular girl in class, but she has definitely found her place. Lucas nodded, relieved. The first few weeks had been tough, with Sophie often coming home in silence, her eyes big and sad. There's one more thing, said Mrs. Garcia, hesitant. The end of semester concert is coming up. Sophie has been selected to perform a piano solo. A solo? Lucas's eyes widened, but she only started lessons a few months ago. Exactly, the teacher smiled. It's unprecedented, but her talent, I can't explain it. She seems to understand music intuitively, as if she already knew it. There it was again, that feeling, as if Sophie had been born knowing things that others took years to learn. Well, that's incredible, Lucas said finally. Marisol will be proud. How is her mother? Asked Mrs. Bennet. So we rarely see her at parent-teacher conferences. She works a lot, Lucas explained. 2 jobs, actually. But she goes over Sophie's schoolwork every night. The teachers nodded respectfully. There was something different in their gazes now, compared to the first meetings. Initially, Lucas had detected a certain polite skepticism, as if they doubted that a cleaning lady's daughter could really excel at Westfield. Now, there was genuine admiration. At school pickup, Lucas found Sophie sitting on a bench, reading a thick book that seemed disproportionate for her small hands. Theory of relativity, he asked, peeking over her shoulder. Light reading for a Thursday afternoon, Sophie smiled, closing the book. It's fascinating. Time isn't really what we think it is. Lucas shook his head, marveling. I heard very good things about you today. Your teachers are impressed. They're nice, Sophie shrugged, but her smile revealed the pride she felt. Mrs. Garcia let me use the piano during recess today. I heard you're going to play in the concert, Lucas commented as they walked to the car. He now picked her up 3 times a week, on the days Marisol worked later. Chopin, Sophie confirmed. Nocturne in E-flat major. It's beautiful but sad. Lucas looked at her. Sad? It's like he's remembering something he lost, Sophie explained with a seriousness that didn't belong to a 7-year-old. Something he can't get back, but can't forget. During the drive to the apartment, Sophie talked about her day. An experiment in science class, a new book in the library, a joke Emily had told at lunch. Her voice was light, cheerful, so different from the silence of the first few months. When they arrived, they found Marisol already home, preparing dinner. Her face lit up when she saw her daughter. Mi vida! How was school today? Sophie ran to hug her mother, launching into an enthusiastic account in rapid Spanish. Lucas watched the scene, leaning against the doorframe. There was a lightness to Marisol that hadn't been there before, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Lucas, she smiled, noticing his presence. Staying for dinner? He nodded. These simple meals in the Rivera's small kitchen had become an important part of his routine. Twice a week, he would have dinner there, help Sophie with her homework, and sometimes read her stories before she went to sleep. While Sophie washed her hands, Lucas told Marisol about the meeting with the teachers. They really like her, he concluded, and they're impressed with her progress. Marisol smiled, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I never thought I would see my daughter in a school like that, with opportunities like these. She deserves every one of them, Lucas replied sincerely, and she earned it all on her own. I just opened the door. Sophie did the rest. During dinner, Sophie talked about the piano concert. Marisol listened attentively, asking questions, showing interest. The transformation was visible, not just in Sophie but in her mother as well. Marisol seemed younger, more confident. She smiled more. After Sophie went to bed, Lucas and Marisol sat in the small living room with cups of coffee. "You seem happier," he observed. Marisol nodded slowly. "Seeing Sophie like this, it's all I've ever wanted for her. A chance to use her gifts, to be valued for them. She really is extraordinary," Lucas commented. "All the teachers say so." A comfortable silence settled between them. Over the past few months, an unlikely friendship had blossomed, the businessman and the cleaning lady, united by the well-being of an exceptional child. "Marisol," Lucas began hesitantly, the question that wouldn't leave his mind finally finding a voice. "How did Sophie know so much before all of this? Before this school, before the music lessons, before me? She already spoke 5 languages. She already understood concepts that many adults don't grasp." Marisol looked at her cup for a long moment. When she looked up, there was something in her eyes that Lucas couldn't decipher. A mix of pride, sadness, and something else, something like apprehension. "Someday," she said softly, "I'll tell you the whole story, but not today." Lucas nodded, respecting her silence. Whatever secret Marisol was keeping, he would wait until she was ready to share it. On the way home, Lucas reflected on the small achievements of the past few months. Sophie finding her place in school, Marisol rediscovering her joy, he himself discovering a satisfaction in helping that no professional success had ever provided. They were modest victories compared to the big deals he closed daily, but somehow they felt infinitely more important. The question about Sophie's past remained unanswered, but perhaps, Lucas thought, the mystery wasn't the most important thing right now. What mattered was the present, an extraordinary girl blossoming, a mother regaining hope, and a man discovering that life had much more to offer than he had ever imagined. Still, as he drove through the silent city, Lucas couldn't help but wonder, how did she know so much before all this? Summer arrived with clear skies and warm afternoons. Classes had been out for 2 weeks, but Sophie continued her studies, now participating in a special summer program at Westfield Academy, reserved for the most promising students. That Friday afternoon, Lucas left the office early. Turner Investments was thriving again. The Japanese investment had paid off, new contracts were signed, and the team had expanded. But, to the surprise of many, the young businessman no longer lived exclusively for work. 3 times a week, without fail, he left everything behind at 4 in the afternoon and drove to Westfield Academy to pick up Sophie. Today, however, he was taking her to a special place. "Where are we going?" Sophie asked from the back seat, looking out the window as they left their usual route. "It's a surprise," Lucas smiled into the rearview mirror. "But I think you're going to like it." 20 minutes later, they parked in front of a low red brick building with large glass windows. A discreet sign announced, "Renoir Music Conservatory." Sophie's eyes widened. "Is this a music school?" "The best in the city," Lucas confirmed, getting out of the car and opening the door for her. "I thought you'd like to see it, since you did so well at the school recital." Sophie had played Chopin with such sensitivity that she had left the audience of parents and teachers in tears. Lucas would never forget the look on Marisol's face that night, pride, love, and a sort of reverent admiration for her own daughter. Inside the conservatory, a middle-aged man with graying hair was waiting for them. Mr. Turner, punctual as always, he smiled, extending his hand. "And this must be Sophie." "Sophie, this is Mr. Abernathy, the director of the conservatory," Lucas introduced. "It's a pleasure to meet you, young lady." The man bowed slightly. "So I've heard impressive things about your talent." Sophie smiled shyly. "Thank you, sir. How about a little tour of our facilities?" Mr. Abernathy suggested. "And then, perhaps we can hear you play a little?" For the next hour, they walked through classrooms equipped with grand pianos, practice studios with instruments of all kinds, and a small concert hall where more advanced students performed. Sophie's eyes shone brighter and brighter. When she finally sat down before a magnificent Steinway in the audition room, her small hands hovered over the keys with reverence. "May I?" she asked. "Please," Mr. Abernathy gestured, sitting down next to Lucas to listen. The first notes of Chopin's Nocturne filled the room. Lucas watched, still marveling at the transformation that occurred whenever Sophie played. The shy little girl disappeared, replaced by an artist who seemed to channel emotions far beyond her years. When the last note faded, Mr. Abernathy remained silent for several seconds. "Extraordinary," he finally murmured. "Absolutely extraordinary." Lucas smiled, feeling that peculiar pride that had become familiar over the last few months. "We would be delighted to have you as a student this fall, Sophie," the director continued. "With your talent, we could offer a personalized program, in addition to your regular classes at the academy." Sophie's eyes sparkled. "I could study here for real." "If your mother agrees," Lucas replied. "I thought we could talk to her about it tonight." The Rivera's apartment had changed. Not drastically, it was still the same small, simple space, but details revealed a subtle transformation. More books, organized on new shelves, a small electronic keyboard in the corner of the room, new curtains on the windows. Small signs of a life that, while still modest, was becoming more comfortable. Marisol received the news about the conservatory with a mix of joy and concern. "I don't know if we can accept this too, Lucas," she said quietly, as Sophie practiced on the keyboard. "You already do so much for us." "It's not a favor, Marisol," Lucas replied sincerely. "It's an investment in the future. Sophie has a rare gift. It would be a waste not to cultivate it." Marisol looked at her daughter with soft eyes. She has always loved music. Even when she was very little, she responded to melodies in a different way. Lucas watched Sophie for a moment. The question that had been haunting him for months returned with force. "I'll make dinner," Marisol announced, standing up. "Why don't you help Sophie with her summer homework?" Lucas approached the small sofa where Sophie was now writing in her notebook, the same old notebook she had clutched on that first day, in the meeting room. "Math?" he asked, sitting down beside her. "Exponential functions," Sophie confirmed, showing him the exercises. "It's fun." Lucas smiled. What other children would consider torture, Sophie saw as entertainment. For a moment, they sat in silence, just the sound of the pencil on paper and Marisol preparing dinner in the kitchen. The golden late afternoon light streamed through the window, creating a calm and welcoming atmosphere. "Sophie," Lucas began softly, finally giving voice to the question that wouldn't leave him. "Who taught you to speak like that? All those languages, all that knowledge?" Sophie looked up from her notebook, her gaze meeting his. For an instant, it seemed she would look away, as she always did when the subject came up. But this time something was different. She smiled and hugged the notebook to her chest. "My mum," she answered simply. "She taught me to love words." Lucas glanced briefly at Marisol, who was stirring something on the stove, her back to them. "But 5 languages. And all those technical words you used in the meeting." Sophie just kept smiling, that enigmatic smile that seemed to hold secrets much bigger than herself. "Mom taught me that words are doors," she said. "Every new word opens a new place. The more doors you can open, the farther you can go." There was something so simple and profound in that explanation that Lucas didn't know how to respond. He just watched as Sophie returned to her exercise, her head bent over the notebook, concentrating. After a few minutes, she carefully tore a sheet from her notebook and worked on it in silence, shielding it with her arm so he couldn't see. "Done," she finally announced, handing the paper to Lucas. It was a drawing made with colored pencils, 3 figures holding hands, a small girl in the middle, a woman on one side, a man in a suit on the other. Above them, a bright blue sky with a radiant yellow sun. In the bottom corner, written in a child's careful handwriting, was the message, "Thank you for being our friend." Lucas felt something tighten in his chest, an emotion so intense and unexpected, it caught him off guard. It was just a child's drawing, simple and direct. But somehow, it perfectly captured the transformation that had occurred in his life over the past few months. "Sophie, this is..." He hesitated, searching for words. "Do you like it?" she asked, her eyes wide and attentive. "I love it," Lucas replied, his voice slightly hoarse. "It's the most beautiful gift I've ever received." Sophie smiled, satisfied, and went back to her homework. Marisol, who had been watching the scene from the kitchen, met Lucas's gaze over her daughter's head. There was something in that look. Gratitude, yes, but also something deeper. A connection that had grown slowly, almost imperceptibly, over the months. "Dinner is almost ready," she announced softly. During the meal, they talked about the conservatory, about plans for the rest of the summer, about a book Sophie was reading. A simple, ordinary conversation, like that of any family. And it was in that moment, watching Sophie excitedly talk about a passage from the book, while Marisol smiled with pride, that Lucas realized a simple, overwhelming truth. These two people had become his family, not by blood or obligation, but by choice and affection. "How you know," he said when there was a pause in the conversation. "I'm very lucky to have you guys too." Sophie smiled as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Marisol looked down, but a small smile touched her lips. That night, back in his elegant, empty apartment, Lucas put Sophie's drawing on the refrigerator, held by a magnet. A simple, domestic gesture that made the space feel a little more like a home. The routine had settled in naturally. On Monday mornings, Lucas would arrive early at the Riveras apartment to take Sophie to school. They usually had breakfast together, a simple but cozy meal before leaving. On that particular Monday in August, the sky threatened rain. Sophie was especially excited. She was starting advanced French lessons with a private tutor at the school library. "Vous êtes prêt, Monsieur Lucas?" she asked with a smile, adjusting the backpack on her shoulders. "Oui, mademoiselle," he replied, returning the smile. His French was basic, learned on business trips, nothing compared to her fluency. "Take the umbrella," Marisol recommended, handing her daughter a small blue folding umbrella. "It looks like it's going to rain later." "Yes, Mom." Sophie hugged her mother quickly and ran to the door. "Come on, Lucas. I don't want to be late." Lucas exchanged an amused look with Marisol. "I will be back this afternoon." "Actually," Marisol said, her voice suddenly serious, "could you come back after you drop her off? I'd like to talk to you." Something in her expression made him pause. "Of course. Is everything okay?" "Yes," she nodded, though her eyes conveyed a different message. "I just need to talk about a few things." "Lucas, let's go," Sophie called from the hallway. "I'll be back in half an hour," he promised, feeling a growing unease. The drive to school was filled with Sophie's enthusiasm about her French lessons and the book she was reading, a biography of Marie Curie that Lucas had given her the week before. He tried to keep the conversation going, but his mind kept returning to Marisol and her unusual request. When he returned to the apartment, he found her sitting at the kitchen table, 2 cups of coffee in front of her. There was something different about her posture, a tension, a formality that hadn't normally existed between them after so many months of friendship. "Why did something happen?" Lucas asked, sitting across from her. Marisol took a deep breath, as if gathering courage, her hands wrapped around the coffee cup, seeking warmth and steadiness. "I've been thinking for a long time about how to tell you this," she began, her voice lower than usual, "about Sophie, about me, about how we got to where we are." Lucas nodded, giving her space to continue. "You've always asked how Sophie knows so many things," Marisol continued, "how she speaks so many languages, how she understands concepts that children her age normally don't." "I always thought it was a natural talent," Lucas replied. "Saya, combined with your dedication as a mother." A sad smile crossed Marisol's lips. "There is talent, yes, but there's also a story you don't know." She paused, taking a sip of coffee. "A story that, ironically, is connected to yours." Lucas felt a chill of apprehension. "What do you mean?" Marisol placed her cup on the table and looked directly at him. "My maiden name isn't Rivera. It's Vasquez. My family owned Vasquez International Publishing." The name sparked a distant echo in Lucas's memory. He frowned, trying to remember where he had heard it before. It was one of the largest publishing houses in Latin America, Marisol continued, founded by my grandfather, expanded by my father. We had branches in 5 countries. We published in 7 languages. I didn't know, Lucas murmured, surprised by the revelation. How could you have known? She shrugged. That was 8 years ago, before Sophie was born, before I became a cleaning lady. The way she said the last word, without self-pity, just stating a fact, made Lucas's heart ache. I grew up in a house full of books, Marisol went on, her gaze now distant, as if seeing beyond the walls of the small apartment. We traveled constantly. France, Japan, Italy, all over Latin America. Business, but also culture. My father believed that to publish well, you had to understand the world. Lucas listened, fascinated by this glimpse of a Marisol he had never imagined existed. I studied at international schools. I learned languages like one learns to breathe, naturally out of necessity. By the age of 20, I spoke 6 languages fluently. I had a degree in comparative literature. I was ready to take my place in the family company. Her voice grew lower, more tense. Then, the acquisition happened. Lucas felt a shiver run down his spine. Something about the way she said that word. An American conglomerate offered to buy the publishing house. My father initially refused. It was the family's legacy, our purpose, but the pressure mounted. Problems started to arise. Contracts mysteriously cancelled, important authors being lured away to other publishers, banks refusing lines of credit without clear explanation. Marisol paused, her eyes now fixed on Lucas. The conglomerate was called Turner Media Holdings. The impact of those words hit Lucas like a physical blow. Turner Media Holdings, his father's company before the restructuring that created Turner Investments. My father, he was involved in this? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Marisol nodded slowly. He led the acquisition. It was considered a great corporate success at the time, buying a publishing house that was worth much more for a fraction of its value. Lucas felt his stomach sink. He vaguely remembered his father mentioning that acquisition years ago, a masterstroke of business, he had called it. What happened after? He asked, dreading the answer. What always happens in these stories, Marisol replied with a calmness that seemed hard-won. The company was broken up. Assets sold off. Most of the employees were fired. The publishing house my grandfather built ceased to exist in less than a year. And your family? My father didn't survive the blow. Literally. Her voice faltered briefly. He had a heart attack 3 months later. My mother had already passed away years before. I was left alone, with what was left, which wasn't much. The debts consumed almost everything. Lucas felt nauseous, his comfort, his wealth, the empire he had inherited, all built, in part, on the destruction of this woman's life. That's when I met Carlos, Sophie's father, Marisol continued. He was a photographer, worked for the publishing house. We fell in love, married quickly. When I found out I was pregnant, we decided to start over in the United States, away from the memories, the debts, the lost empire. And Sophie's father. He left us when she was 2. Marisol shrugged, as if it were just another chapter in the story. He said he hadn't signed up for a life of poverty. He went back to his country and we never heard from him again. Lucas tried to process it all. The cleaning lady who cleaned his office, the mother of the girl who had saved his company, had once been the heiress to a publishing empire, an educated woman who spoke 6 languages, someone who had her future stolen by his own family. So that's why Sophie, he began. Yes, Marisol confirmed. Even without resources, I gave her what no one could take away, knowledge. I taught her every language I know. Used books are cheap, sometimes even free. Libraries are free. We would speak in different languages during dinner, before bed. She smiled slightly. Sophie is like a sponge. She absorbs everything with an ease that even I, with all the privileges I had, never experienced. I think it's a natural gift, amplified by necessity. For her, every new piece of knowledge is a promise of a better future. Lucas sat in silence, feeling the weight of the revelation, It all made sense now. Sophie's maturity, her command of languages, her understanding of complex concepts. It wasn't just natural talent. It was the legacy of a former life that Marisol had carefully preserved for her daughter, even when everything else had been lost. "Why are you telling me this now?" he finally asked. Marisol took a deep breath. "Because Sophie cares about you, because you've become a part of our lives, and because you deserve to know the truth about who we are and how we got here. Did you know who I was from the beginning?" The question that tormented him. "Not immediately," she admitted. "I recognized your last name, of course, but there are many Turners. It was only when I saw your father on television months ago talking about the company that I was sure. The resemblance is striking." Lucas felt a wave of shame. While Marisol cleaned his office, while he agonized over the future of his company, she knew she was working for the family that had destroyed hers. "I don't know what to say," he murmured. "I'm sorry. Feels completely inadequate." "I'm not telling you this to blame you," Marisol replied with surprising kindness. "You weren't involved. You were just a teenager at the time." "But I benefited from it," Lucas insisted. "My whole life, my privilege, my company, all built only in part on the ruin of your family." Marisol watched him with eyes that had seen worlds born and die. "Life is rarely simple, Lucas. There are no just villains and victims. Your father did what businessmen do in this system. My father wasn't smart enough to protect what we had." "That doesn't make it right," Lucas argued. "No," she agreed. "It doesn't. But it also doesn't mean you should carry this guilt." The silence that followed was heavy, laden with revelations and implications. Lucas looked at the woman before him with new eyes, no longer the shy cleaning lady, but a survivor, a woman who had lost everything and yet had raised an extraordinary daughter from the ashes of her former life. "What do we do now?" he asked finally. Marisol smiled slightly. "We continue, for Sophie." Lucas nodded, but his heart was heavy. His success was born, in part, from their ruin, a truth that changed everything, and at the same time, changed nothing about what Sophie meant to him now. As the rain finally began to fall outside, Lucas Turner understood that some debts cannot be paid with money, and some stories don't have simple endings, only new chapters waiting to be written. Lucas didn't show up to pick up Sophie on Tuesday. He called Marisol with an excuse about an emergency meeting. On Wednesday, he sent a driver. On Thursday, another excuse. Sitting in his office on the top floor of the Turner Investments building, he contemplated the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows. His empire, built on the rubble of other empires. The phone rang several times during the day. Michelle came in with documents that needed signing. Life went on as normal, but nothing felt normal to Lucas. Marisol's words echoed in his mind. "The publishing house my grandfather built ceased to exist in less than a year. How many other stories like that existed in the company's files? How many families had lost everything so that Turner could prosper?" On Friday afternoon, his personal phone rang. It was Sophie. He hesitated before answering, feeling a mix of shame and longing. "Hello? Lucas." Her voice sounded small, insecure. "Are you mad at me?" The question hit him like a punch. "Of course not, Sophie. Why would you think that? You didn't come to visit us or pick me up from school." There was a restrained sadness in her words that made his chest ache. "Did I do something wrong?" "No, Sophie," he replied, closing his eyes tightly. "You did nothing wrong. I just had a complicated week. Mom is sad too," she continued. "She thinks you don't want to be our friend anymore." Lucas felt the guilt grow. In his confusion and shame, he was hurting the very people he wanted to protect. "Sophie, listen," he said, straightening in his chair. "I will never stop being your friend, I promise. I'll be there tomorrow, okay? We can go to the park if you want." "Do you really promise?" The hope in her voice was palpable. "I promise. Word of honor." After hanging up, Lucas remained motionless for several minutes. What was he doing? Running away like a coward, avoiding facing the truth that Marisol had shared. His desk was covered in papers, reports, contracts, financial projections, the instruments of his success, but suddenly they seemed devoid of meaning. He picked up Sophie's drawing, which he kept framed next to his computer, 3 figures holding hands under a blue sky. "Thank you for being our friend." He wasn't worthy of that gratitude. He wasn't worthy of Sophie's trust nor Marisol's honesty. Or was he? Lucas stood up abruptly and walked to the window. The truth didn't make him less worthy of their affection. It made him responsible for doing better, for being better than his father had been. Avoiding Marisol and Sophie didn't alleviate his guilt. It just proved he didn't have the courage to face the past and try to repair it. And reparation was exactly what was needed now. He returned to his desk and opened his laptop. There was research to do, plans to be made. If his father had destroyed Marisol's family legacy, perhaps it was his role to rebuild it. Somehow. He worked late into the night, researching, planning, making calls. When he finally went home, a new determination had replaced the shame. On Saturday morning, he drove to the Riverasour's apartment with a clarity he hadn't felt in days. Sophie opened the door, her face lighting up when she saw him. "You came." "I promised, didn't I?" Lucas smiled, bending down to receive her hug. Marisol appeared behind her daughter, her gaze cautious, but not hostile. "Can we talk after the park?" Lucas asked her. "I have some ideas I'd like to share." Marisol nodded slowly. "So of course." As he left with Sophie by the hand, Lucas still felt the weight of the truth on his shoulders, but now, instead of crushing him, that weight propelled him forward. There were old wounds that needed to be healed. There were injustices that, even if not committed by his hands, demanded reparation. And Lucas Turner finally understood that running away was not an option. Not if he wanted to be worthy of the drawing on his wall and the affection of this small family that, against all odds, had entered his life. The park was full of life that Saturday morning. Children ran around, dogs barked happily, and the late summer sun created golden patterns through the leaves of the trees. Sophie ran ahead, occasionally stopping to show Lucas some discovery, an unusual leaf, an interesting insect, a colorful flower. Lucas watched her with a smile, but his thoughts were on the conversation that would come later. In his briefcase, carefully prepared documents from the week awaited, the culmination of sleepless nights, consultations with lawyers, and decisions that would change not only the Rivera's lives, but his own as well. "You're quiet today," Sophie commented when they stopped for ice cream on a bench. "I'm thinking," Lucas answered honestly. "About good things or bad things?" He considered the question. "About fair things?" Sophie nodded as if she understood perfectly, licking her chocolate ice cream with the seriousness of someone performing an important task. When they returned to the apartment, it was already past noon. Marisol had prepared lunch. An aroma of spices filled the small space. Sophie ran to wash her hands, leaving the adults alone in the living room for a moment. "Thank you for taking her to the park," Marisol said, breaking the silence. "She missed you this week." "I missed her too," Lucas admitted. "Both of you." Something in his tone made Marisol study him more closely. "You seem different." "We need to talk after lunch," he said. "I have some things to show you." The lunch passed, with Sophie's cheerful chatter filling any uncomfortable silences. She talked about her classes, a book she was reading, her plans for her next piano lessons. Lucas and Marisol listened, responded, smiled, a family in all but name. When they finished, Marisol served coffee for herself and Lucas. Sophie picked up a book and settled on the small sofa, giving them the privacy they needed but remaining nearby, as if she instinctively sensed that something important was about to happen. Lucas opened his briefcase and took out an organized stack of documents. "This week," he began, his voice calm but determined, "I did a lot of research about Vasquez Publishing, about what happened after the acquisition, about the people involved." Marisol tensed but didn't interrupt him. "What my father did," Lucas continued, choosing his words carefully, "was legal, in the technical terms of business, but it wasn't right, it wasn't ethical. He used aggressive tactics to devalue a healthy company, force a sale below its real value, and then dismantle a family legacy for quick profit." He placed the first document on the table. "This is an independent report I commissioned on the real value of Vasquez Publishing at the time of the acquisition, compared to the price paid. The difference is Substantial. Marisol looked at the numbers, her face impassive, but her eyes revealed the pain of the memories. "I can't undo what was done," Lucas continued. "I can't bring your father back, nor restore the lost years, but I can start to repair the financial damage." He slid another document toward her, a deed. "This is the title to a house in the Oakwood Hills neighborhood. 3 bedrooms, a garden, near Sophie's school and the conservatory. It's in your name." Marisol looked at the paper, then at Lucas, speechless. "There's more," he continued, placing another document on the table. "This is a contract establishing an educational trust for Sophie. It covers all costs of her education, from elementary school to postgraduate studies, if she wishes. Private lessons, educational trips, everything." His hands trembled slightly as he placed the last set of documents on the table. "And this is a contract offering you a minority stake in Turner Investments, 5% of the company. It's not charity, Marisol. It's partly a restitution for the value that was unfairly taken from your family, but it's also a recognition that your perspective, your experience, your knowledge would be valuable to the company." Marisol stared at the documents, stunned. Sophie had put her book aside and was watching the scene with attentive eyes. "Lucas," Marisol finally managed to say, her voice almost a whisper. I can't." "Yes, you can," he interrupted gently. "What my family took, I want to start giving back. Not out of guilt, though I feel it. Not out of pity, because I know you wouldn't accept it, but for justice. And because," he hesitated, searching for the right words, "because you two have become important to me. More important than any business or bank account." Marisol touched the papers with her fingertips, as if she couldn't believe they were real. "This would change everything," she murmured. "Only on the outside," Lucas replied. "What really matters, your strength, your dignity, the love between you and Sophie, that already exists, regardless of anything I can offer." Sophie stood up and approached the table, looking curiously at the documents. "Are we moving?" she asked, grasping the gist of the situation with her usual insight. Marisol looked at her daughter, then at Lucas, tears starting to form in her eyes. "I don't know, honey," she answered softly. "It's a very big decision." "But we would have more room for books, right?" Sophie asked. Practical as always. Lucas couldn't help but smile. "A lot more room for books, and maybe even a real piano." Sophie's eyes lit up. "Say the house has a garden," Lucas added, "and it's only 10 minutes from the school." Marisol discreetly wiped away a tear that was running down her cheek. "Lucas, I deeply appreciate what you're offering, but I don't want you to do this out of guilt or obligation." "It's not that," he replied sincerely. "It's true that I started thinking about this because of what you told me, but the more I considered it, the more I realized it's what I really want to do, not just to right the wrongs of the past, but to build something better for the future." He extended his hand across the table, a gesture of connection. "You and Sophie have taught me more in the last few months than I learned in years in the business world, about what really matters, about family, about dignity and perseverance." Marisol hesitated, then placed her hand on his. "I need time to think," she said finally. "This is a very big decision." "Of course," Lucas nodded, understanding. "Take all the time you need. The documents are yours to review. Consult a lawyer if you wish. All I ask is that you consider it seriously, not for me, but for you and Sophie." At that moment, Sophie moved. Coming around the table, she approached Lucas and, without warning, wrapped him in a hug. Not the quick, shy hug of the past, but a full hug of trust and affection. "Thank you," she whispered against his shoulder. Lucas felt something warm and intense expand in his chest, an emotion that had no name, but filled empty spaces he didn't even know existed. "You're welcome, Sophie," he replied softly, returning the hug. When she pulled away, Lucas saw that Marisol was watching the scene with teary eyes. Something had changed in her expression. An invisible barrier was beginning to dissolve. 3 weeks later, moving boxes filled the small apartment. Marisol had reviewed every document meticulously, consulted a lawyer recommended by a former colleague from the publishing house, and finally accepted Lucas's proposal, not without her own conditions, of course. She had insisted on paying a symbolic amount for the house, so it's truly ours, not a gift, she had explained. And as for the stake in the company, she had made it clear that she intended to be an active partner, not just a name on a piece of paper. Lucas had accepted all her conditions with respect. In fact, he had felt a strange pride watching Marisol negotiate with the same dignity and intelligence she showed in everything she did. The move took place on a sunny autumn Saturday. Lucas hired a professional team, but made a point of helping personally. There was something symbolic in carrying those boxes, in physically participating in the transition. The house in Oakwood Hills was exactly as he had promised, spacious without being ostentatious, comfortable without being luxurious, a home, not a mansion, the kind of place where a family could grow and thrive. Sophie immediately claimed the room overlooking the backyard for herself. Once the bookshelves were installed and her books were organized, now complemented by many new volumes Lucas had brought as a housewarming gift, the space transformed into a small paradise for the curious, knowledge-hungry girl. 2 months after the move, on a late November afternoon, Marisol was on the back porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Wrapped in a light blanket, a cup of tea in her hands, she breathed in the fresh air with a peaceful expression she hadn't experienced in years. The sound of a door opening caught her attention. Lucas came in through the side gate, as he had done so many times in recent weeks. "Hi," he smiled, walking up the porch steps. "Productive day?" Marisol nodded. Since accepting the position at the company, she had divided her time between working at the Turner Investments office 3 days a week and taking care of the house on the others. No longer as a cleaning lady, but as a consultant and, recently, as the director of the newly formed International Publications Department. "Where's Sophie in her room?" Lucas asked, taking the briefcase off his shoulder. "Studying, as always." Marisol smiled. "I don't think she even noticed it got dark." Lucas laughed softly. "I brought those reports I mentioned. I thought we could review them together." Since Marisol had taken on her role in the company, Lucas had made a point of consulting her on important decisions. At first, it was just a gesture of respect. But it soon became clear that she had a natural talent for business, a combination of literary knowledge, strategic vision, and a unique perspective that brought new dimensions to the company. "Of course," she replied, indicating the chair next to hers. "Sam, but first, tell me how your meeting with the French investors went." As they talked about business, strategies, and future possibilities, the golden twilight bathed the house. From inside, the soft sound of a piano began to flow, Sophie practicing the new piece she had learned at the conservatory. Lucas stopped mid-sentence, smiling as he heard the perfect notes. "Now she has a gift," he commented. "Several gifts," Marisol corrected with motherly pride. After a few minutes, the music stopped and Sophie appeared at the door. "I thought I heard your voice," she smiled at Lucas. "Did you bring those astronomy books you promised?" "In the car," he replied. "I'll get them after dinner." Sophie approached, sitting on the porch step near them. Her gaze went from Marisol to Lucas, and a smile of understanding lit up her face. "Are you guys talking about work again?" she asked, with the familiarity of someone who already knew the answer. "Guilty," Lucas admitted, raising his hands in surrender. Sophie laughed, then reached out and took Lucas's hand, holding it with the naturalness of someone performing a gesture repeated 1,000 times. "Can we have dinner first and talk about work later?" she suggested. "I'm hungry." Marisol and Lucas exchanged amused glances. "A very sensible priority," Marisol agreed, standing up. "I'll heat up what I prepared earlier." As the three of them went inside, Lucas felt a strange sense of completeness. Here, in this modest house in Oakwood Hills, something had been restored, not just for Marisol and Sophie, but for him as well. The past couldn't be erased. Vasquez Publishing would not exist as it once had. Marisol's father would not return. The scars would remain, but something new had been born from the ashes of the old, something that perhaps was even more valuable, an unlikely family, bound not by blood, but by choice, by respect, by a shared desire to build something better than what came before. As Sophie chattered about her piano lesson, and Marisol set the table for dinner, Lucas understood that starting over didn't erase the past, but it could transform it into something more just and true. And maybe, in the end, that was enough. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.